Welcome to Martino Movie Reviews. I'm Dave North Martino. So some of you watching me on YouTube, you're going to get a little different version. We're going to talk about this movie, Oppenheimer. Did you see Oppenheimer? I'm curious. Where did you see it? What was your experience like? Did you see it in a regular theater, like digital projection? Did you see it maybe in an Atmos theater? Did you see it in the IMAX? Maybe that was digital, or maybe you saw it in glorious 70 millimeter film, right? 1570. Let me know. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to know. And what was your experience? Because I'm going to tell you right now, there were some experiences out there, some different stuff. We'll talk about some things as we move along. So stick with me. Stick with me. So I was lucky enough, I was able to go to the IMAX in Providence, which was showing it in 70 millimeter film, which is a treat because you don't get that very often. But there can be problems. There can be problems. We're going to go into that in a minute. So I'm going to give you my takeaways, and the written version, there's a few things that I didn't think to either put in, or I didn't want to take too much time. We have a little bit more time here, and we can talk about this movie. And that's what I really like to do. I really like to talk about this film. So Oppenheimer. So I always say Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer 2023 is a biographical, really a political thriller film directed by Christopher Nolan. It's based on the biography American Prometheus, 2005. By Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. And it stars Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Florence Pugh, and a cavalcade of other fine actors. What this movie really goes into is it tells the story of the Manhattan Project and the nuclear arms race. And it does so through the biography of J. Robert Oppenheimer, who's played by Cillian Murphy. And much of the movie, we experience this film from Oppenheimer's subjective perspective. And it's interesting that Christopher Nolan, when he was writing the script, he wrote this in first person. And that's not usually done. So very interesting. And I believe that's because he really, really wanted to get into the mind of Oppenheimer and kind of project that out to us. Now, the subjective experience is represented in color photography, while the objective observations are presented in black and white photography. And they had to, I think, develop a film stock and actually a camera that could do this black and white photography. So very interesting stuff, very, very neat stuff. Now, before I go into my observations on the film, I want to talk about some of the actors here. And there are a lot. I'm not going to go through everybody. But first off, we have Cillian Murphy. Now, he finally gets his due here. I've been following him since like 2005. Batman Begins. That's when he really came onto my radar. And he's someone who's been underutilized in Hollywood. Here, I never doubted his performance. He really became Oppenheimer. He's able to show Oppenheimer's confidence, maybe his arrogance and his doubts and his vulnerabilities. He's presented as a man of brilliance with failings and even some duplicity. I really believe that this is an Oscar-worthy performance, and he should definitely be up for an Oscar for this film. Another Oscar contender would be Robert Downey Jr. He's great here. This is probably the best performance of his life. I think he said that he felt this was the best movie he's ever been in. And it's probably correct. He's probably right. He plays Louis Strauss, who is the Secretary of Commerce. And he's a former friend who has become an antagonist to Oppenheimer. But he is, in a way, one of the human antagonists, maybe the primary human antagonists here, that drives a good portion of the story. And you get into Strauss's mind. You get into, at least how it's presented here, maybe a little bit of his narcissism, how vindictive he can be. It's very, very interesting. And it's a great performance. Matt Damon was actually pretty decent here. In the beginning, I had a hard time A very hard time separating him from his previous roles. He's not my favorite, but he really did a good job of selling this character for me. I'm going to see this at least one more time, and maybe even in the theater. So I think coming to it again I think I'll feel differently about Matt Damon's performance. But he did grow on me throughout the viewing. Emily Blunt as Kitty. She also deserves an Oscar here. She plays kind of the counterpoint to her relationship with Oppenheimer. They have a very complex relationship. And even so, she's ever the loyal wife, despite what he's doing behind the scenes. And she's really the foundation behind a lot of his greatness. And when she is angered, right, or crossed, you know it. And she really does, Emily Blunt does a great job of turning on that professionalism of the character, but also like being able to snap into anger at any moment. It's really good. And I think sometimes acting like that is subtle. You know, I saw people who didn't like her performance, and I think it's because they didn't like her character. I think she's so good here that people don't like her character, and so they think they don't like her performance. Interestingly enough, I didn't recognize Florence Pugh right away. She plays Jean Tatlock, and she's absorbed into this character. At one point, Nolan, he kind of artistically renders their relationship, Oppenheimer and Tatlock's relationship, sitting there. And there's a little nudity in this movie, not much. And they're sitting there naked and they're separate. And it's kind of it's like looking at two art paintings. Very interesting because there's a closeness, because this is after they've slept together, but they're separate now. And there's this closeness and there's this separation. There's a gap between them that can't quite be navigated. And the space between them, interestingly enough, I started to think about this. There's a space between them that's like the space between atoms. It has pulled them together over time, but it has weakened. It is somewhat weakened here. So I likened it to like the strong force and the weak force. You have the strong force. So this is interesting as we start to analyze this film. There's the strong force, which is Oppenheimer and Kitty, his wife, and the weak force, who is Oppenheimer and Tatlock. Before we get too far into this, I wanted to go into something that I left out of the review because I found it hard to kind of put it in after I had written the whole review. But there's actually a lot of, there's at least a couple scenes of rain, and it's like these droplets and the spaces in between these droplets. And I think they also kind of represent, you know, these atoms, this idea of the atomic age. And I just think it's interesting how Nolan kind of renders some of this stuff. Also, I want to talk about, there's a character. I'm just going to talk, there's a character. We're not going to say who it is. And there is the character's fate. And then there is an actual conspiracy theory about the character's actual fate. Now, I didn't talk about this in my written review, and it's very quick, and some people may miss it. But it kind of shows, Nolan basically will show you how visually, how one of two things maybe happened, and we don't know which one happened. So he renders both the official and the conspiratorial version of this idea in that scene, and it's very interesting. So watch out for that. Now, I want you to look for Gary Oldman. He is unrecognizable. I'm not going to say who he plays. He is unrecognizable. And he is always the chameleon. And he cements his role in this movie as to why he's really, in my opinion, one of the greatest actors of our time. David Malian plays William L. Borden. Now, Dave Malian is the most underrated and underutilized and underappreciated actors working in Hollywood today. At one point, I would have said it was Cillian Murphy. But Cillian Murphy being the star of this, now Dave Malian has been moved up to the top. He gets more screen time in this film than he usually gets in other films. And I really feel the picture is better for it. And I hope, like Cillian Murphy, he gets his due in time. He is an amazing actor. He can do a lot. He tends to play bad guys, and he tends to play characters who might be kind of teetering on the edge of criminality or full-blown criminality, like in movies like Ant-Man. And of course, he played Murdoch in the new version of MacGyver, but he's great here. Now, here's a great thing, I think, in that, unlike many films today, Oppenheimer never strays from the time period. There's no rewriting of history, and we're given the people of the time as best as anyone can render, and without modern reinterpretations. And Hollywood is known for that lately. They reinterpret everything. They change things. This is pretty well done when it comes to accuracy, from what I can see and from the research I've done. Now, I wanted to add, and I didn't do this in the written review, is that it's well-paced. It didn't feel like 3 hours. It was really a joy to watch. And in the IMAX, and we're going to go into more on that in a second, but in the IMAX, there's all these like vistas, and they open up to the full aspect ratio, and it's great. It really gives you this feeling of space and distance, and it really, I think, helps the theme of this movie. This is a movie that features imperfect people with imperfect information, with imperfect theories, imperfect characters who have diversity of thought and diversity of motivations, and they all have to assemble to accomplish a necessary goal. It tells the story of how we can come together during times of great need, no matter our differences, to do anything that's necessary. Now, in this film, and in real life at that time, it was to win a war. But this film also tells of unintended consequences. And it tells of the political fallout when winds shift, when the political winds shift, and the inability to put the genie back in the bottle. And this is, I think, very important because today we are more divided than ever. And we really, as a nation, need to come together. We need to come together. We need to look at on what brings us together than what pulls us apart, than our differences. And we can do it. And we've done it before. And we can do it again. And that's why I don't like to focus on politics, because, these political things, they just drive us apart. They create a wedge instead of bringing us together. And we need more of that. And it talks about how complicated it shows. This movie shows how complicated things are. There's no easy solutions. Politics are complicated. People are complicated. People are duplicitous. Nothing here is looked at as simplistic. Nothing is looked at as simplicity. And we even can see how, and Nolan shows how it's easy for us to hear something or not to hear something. And then our mind interprets it and says, this person's saying that about me. This person's doing this against me, but maybe that's not true. And he shows how that can lead to someone's ruin. On film, Oppenheimer is a revelation. It really is a towering achievement, and I believe an instant classic. Nolan is one of the greatest directors, if not the greatest director of our time. Far from a depressing movie, Oppenheimer is a film of hope and redemption, and it gets my highest recommendation. Now you can watch Oppenheimer. It's in theaters and it's in glorious IMAX, especially if you can watch it in 70 millimeter film. Now, just be warned. Now, I wanted to talk to you about this. The IMAX projectors have been breaking down under the weight of the 600-pound film reels. Now, my wife and I, we saw the film in Providence, Rhode Island, and that happened during our showing. All of a sudden, the screen went black, and it was dark, and you could still hear the audio. I got to talk to you about audio in a second, but you could still hear the audio, and then it was done. Now, in some cinemas, in some IMAXs, they actually went out and said, "Hey, folks, the moose should have told you outside." No, but they said that, there was a problem and we'll have it up and running in like 5 minutes or whatever. Nobody came in to tell us that. And people streamed out to use the bathroom and to grab more popcorn and drinks and stuff. And so we had to wait for people to kind of file back in, and they got it up and running. And we were back off to the races, the atomic age races. So they had it back up and running at least, within, 10, 15 minutes. And, it's a film experience. So you're certainly going to get a little bit of, dust on the lens. And it's not this complete pristine 4K experience that you're used to at home. But yet it's huge, it's immersive, it's analog. It's something that you can't get at home. And it's something really, and there was somebody that I can't remember who had said this, but he was talking about, this is movie history. You are now part of movie history. You are watching something that will not be shown again, most likely, in the IMAX on 70 millimeter film. Some people, like the author David Morrell, he was going to see it in 35 millimeter because he's in New Mexico, and there was only one place that he could find where they were showing it on film. But you get to tell your grandkids or whatever that you saw this film and it broke down and it was part of movie history. They may not care, but it is kind of an interesting thing. So if you can see it in 70 millimeter IMAX, I suggest it. Okay, here's the story doctoring. Now, on first viewing, I'm left with the impression that there might be a little heavy-handedness in defining the good guys and the bad guys in this story. And although Nolan is really good at dealing with complexity, and the characters and their real-life counterparts are complete living people, and they're complex, living in a complex time, as we are, I would have liked to see a little ambiguity in some scenes. Some scenes were played to give a little bit of levity, so I understand that. But I think there was a little ham-handedness there. But it doesn't hurt the viewing experience too badly. So I can't really knock the movie for that. Other problems. One problem that I didn't think about, because it only bothered me for a short period of time, was in the beginning of the film, I noticed there was some sound issues. The sound issues, kind of like Tenet, Nolan's last film, the music may have been a little bit too high for the dialogue, and the dialogue was a little bit maybe muffled. But it seemed to rectify itself before the middle of the film, and I actually forgot about it. But this seems to be a problem, or at least a growing problem with Nolan's films, and I don't know why. Now, I also heard somebody say about letting the scenes breathe. And I think, especially in the beginning, there's like this staccato, and I forgot about this. There is this like staccato effect going back and forth with some of these scenes. And I understand what this person was saying about kind of opening up the scenes a little bit. Maybe they've been cut a little bit too short at times. But I also understand that you couldn't have more than a 3-hour movie and put it in the IMAX. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a director's cut and it'll be bigger. Do we need more than 3 hours? I don't know. I don't know. So Dave, what's your rating? Well, I give Oppenheimer 2023 5 out of 5 stars. Highly recommended. Go see it. Go see it now while you can see it in film. See it any which way you can. It is a great film, and they don't make films like this anymore. And if you want more films like this, you need to go out and support it. And I think it's going to be in IMAX for about 3 weeks. So you have plenty of time. See it once, see it twice. So again, if you like movie reviews, if you like physical media, if you like home cinema, I'd love to have you click like, subscribe, put on your bell notifications so we can talk more about cinema. And I hope you'll talk more in the comments about this film and about other films. I'm David North Martino for Martino Movie Reviews. Full written reviews are up at our website. And I hope to see you on the next video